Hey there, my name's Joe Keyport, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. For this week's episode, I talked to Wyatt Moran about his new EP, Start Again, which is out on February 19th. I first became aware of Wyatt when he was releasing music that served more as an audio diary, with each EP kind of corresponding to a year of high school. Just like the title suggests, Start Again marks a new chapter in Wyatt's music-making life as he spent some time in college and has moved away from Minnesota. During the interview, Wyatt and I talk his old releases, his work with Carpet Booth Studios in Rochester, and of course, the new EP. It's Wyatt Moran right here on the Ear Coffee Podcast. Wyatt, how's it going here this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Gotcha. It's funny. So, Wyatt, I don't know if you remember, but I reached out to you like 2 years ago to do the podcast. Like I found the message forever ago. It was my fault you didn't end up getting on because I like missed the notification that you actually responded to it, but you just put out Junior, and I thought it was really interesting. Oh, wow. The process of you like using music is almost like a journal, like a public journal, and it was kind of cool to like talk about that. But alas, we weren't able to do it then. I do have a couple questions from like those releases, but we're not gonna focus too heavy on the past. We're here to talk about your new EP that you got coming out, hopefully just a few days from now, but we'll be talking about that. So starting off, we always like to start at the beginning for artists we talk to, especially new ones we talk to. Talk to me about your history with music and how we got from, the Wyatt who was maybe listening to music to the Wyatt we have now who's been putting out records.
Gosh, it's a timeline. I started playing bass when I was like 7 or 8 years old. My dad brought home a bass one day and was like, "Hey, you should learn to play this so that we can have like a family band," because my brother at the time was learning how to play drums, and my dad knew how to play guitar. And so he was just like, I think he had this vision of like how we were all gonna be like this family band and be able to play all of his like Rolling Stone songs that he wanted to play, or like, whatever. And so I started playing bass, and like the first song that I learned was like Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones.
Nice.
And then I did that for a while, and it was cool. And then got to middle school and I started playing a lot more guitar, and I got like my first real guitar. It was like this shitty Epiphone SG that I still have at my parents' house, but it's just like got tons of stickers on it and like the whole nine. So I started doing that. I started doing like the talent shows and stuff. I was like, oh, I might be good at this. So kept doing guitar and bass. And then around that point, I was like trying to kind of like figure out a band so that I could play music with other people. And I couldn't find any drummers that were my age, so I started playing drums. And then, so at that point, I'm like about to enter my freshman year of high school, and I'm like, if this whole band thing is going to pan out, because I don't really have anybody to play with. So I was like, I can just do all of it myself. And that's kind of like was the impetus for like recording these records like all by myself. Was that in the beginning, at least, I really didn't have a ton of people in the town that I was growing up in to play and like bounce ideas off of. So yeah, I recorded Freshman, which was the first record that I ever put out in like 2016.
Okay.
Summer of 2016, like right after my freshman year of high school. And I did it like all by myself in my garage with like 2 or 3 microphones.
You got like the Guitar Center like recording special and
yeah, it was like the mics that have like the on off like
yep.
And it, it was not the best. Looking back, a few years later, I listened to it sonically and I'm like, oh my God, like what was going on? But
yeah,
it's cool to just like to know that I was doing something at that point that was like tangible, and I was like, oh, I'm like, this is like mine, and now everybody can hear it.
Yeah.
And so
I don't want to cut you off too, but I was wondering, like you said, you were, doing talent shows and stuff. Do you have like a moment when you realized, like you said, there was like, you realized you could like do this? Was there like a song or something you recorded early on with those, those 2 or 3 kind of, they're not garbage mics, but they're mics that certainly do a job. For all people who are interested in recording, do you have a moment that like really sticks out to you when you realized you could do this? Like beyond like, it was fun and it was fun to play with, but this is like that next step.
Actually. So I think one of those talent shows, it must have been like 7th or 8th grade. So I'm like 13. And I played Clairvoyant by The Story So Far.
Okay.
On guitar, and I sang it for this talent show. And I remember somebody coming up to me afterwards and was like, the person sitting next to me was like crying. I was like, whoa. Like I didn't realize that like the music that I was making in particular could like, make people feel so deeply. And so that was like a moment where I was like, oh wow, this is maybe something that's more that like affects other people instead of like just kind of doing it for myself, In terms of like recording though, I don't think that that kind of stuff really picked up until I did sophomore.
Okay.
Which was in future. But I was kind of coming off the heels of freshman, and everybody was like, oh, so like what's the next one gonna be? Like sophomore? And I was like, actually, sure. It was never like, I think a lot of people had this preconceived notion that it was like from the beginning I was like, I'm gonna do this thing where it's like all of this stuff is like happening in a row, but it wasn't really ever meant to be that way in the beginning. But then somebody mentioned it to me and I was like, oh, that's not a bad idea. And so I kind of just ran with it. But I was still super young, but I had enough confidence under my belt to reach out to a studio in my town called Carpet Booth Studios. Zach Zern is the guy who runs that whole place. And I like sent him like a 16-year-old, like sending like this like 25, 26-year-old engineer an email. And I'm like, hi, like, I want to record at your studio. And
you're trying to be like professional in your mind. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, to his credit, Zach is like the nicest dude ever. And we are still like, we're great friends now. But he was like, yeah, sure. I remember being your age and wanting to do this kind of thing. So I went there and I like recorded in like a pretty professional sounding studio. And I remember getting those first mixes back and I was like, oh shit, like this is like, this sounds like real,
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to sit here and act like, DIY recording is like not a viable option, but, going to a studio and like having like stems and stuff sound like the people that you've been listening to like your whole life was kind of a game changer for me. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like a long-winded answer to that question, but
oh yeah, no, of course we like long-winded answers here on the podcast. Well, because like you talked about, there's like recording DIY is like it has its purpose and it can be really fun and really a really good way to like do something when obviously you don't have the budget to go. Because like it's funny, I played the last Rochester at Carpet Booth.
Oh yeah,
with the band I play with right now. But like going,
I was probably working there if you were
yeah, we
playing.
were
What band were you in?
National Park Service, so we were the first band with all the
Oh,
horns.
no way.
That was the first performance we had played with all 9 of us or whatever there was.
Yeah,
So
I remember that. Yeah, I work at that studio now, so
I was
I was probably there.
yeah, I was wondering if you did, because I was looking through like liner notes on all your releases, especially when I was like realizing over and over again how many times you'd like return to Carpet Booth. I was like, at this point, I feel like you almost probably has something a
Lives
hand
there.
in something. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I started interning there right after I finished junior.
Okay.
I mean, me and Zach had been kind of running in a lot of the same circles, just with like local music stuff, and we always kind of had a lot of the same like ideas when it came to like how to produce and like how to write and the music that we listened to growing up and stuff. And so he was like, "Hey, you should come intern at the studio that I'm running." And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
And so that's been, I think I've been there for like 3 years now.
Nice.
And it's the best. He's the best. That team is the best. I miss them all the time.
Because you've since moved across the country to Boston, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
I've been here like a year and a half.
Okay.
So.
What took you from Minnesota over to Massachusetts?
School.
Okay.
I got accepted to Berkeley last year. So last year was my freshman year, and now did a semester in the fall, and now I'm taking a semester off to kind of just work on this release and other kind of non-academic musical pursuits.
Gotcha. What was it like as a musician? Because I mean, like growing up, did you have a lot of like more academic approaches to like? Were you more academic when it came to music? Like you did the lessons in your scales. Somebody who played in like college symphonies, I'm very unacademically minded when it comes to anything, but. But like moving from something as not strict like rock and pop music and indie music to something like Berkeley where you're studying, what was that transition like?
Well, I did like concert band. I did like all the band in high school.
Okay.
I was in like the concert band, and I played bass clarinet.
Oh wow.
That's a fun fact. And I was like in the jazz band, and I did like the pit orchestra, and I was like on the drum line. And so I kind of had like a basic knowledge of a lot of like the music theory stuff. But then like getting here, it's actually really weirdly kind of not so academic a lot of the time.
Okay. Like
you obviously like I'm taking classes in like harmony and like counterpoint and whatever, but most of the ensembles that I've like played in, it's like very just like vibe based and like, oh yeah, like that sounds cool or like that feels good, rather than like thinking about it in like a way that's
the rules of music.
Yeah, like you have to follow like this rule and do that, so.
Gotcha. So with putting out, those records through high school is kind of like that kind of audio diary that wasn't intended to be an audio diary at first. Were you playing shows that whole time then, or?
Yes. I think I played my first show right after Freshman came out. So I had like just turned 16, and I was doing like just like kind of guitar and singing events at like a local coffee shop, and I was playing like I was doing like the 2 or 3 hour set of like all 5 of my songs at the time, and then like 20 covers, 30 covers. So there was definitely like a time where I was kind of doing like the cover band thing, but as the years progressed, I started playing not like like legitimate shows, because I think all shows are
Yeah.
legit. But like, you know, I started playing like on bills with like a bunch of other bands, and like I did Rochester the second year that it was around, and I did that for 2 or 3 years. I like it kind of just you know, ramped up from just being me to grabbing a couple guys that I knew from town and starting to do like full band stuff. And then eventually it kind of got to a point where I was lucky enough to like be able to go and do like kind of a DIY tour of the greater Midwest area and a little bit of the South last summer of like 2019.
Okay.
So
nice. Well, we can then move on to the EP we're here to talk about, which is Start Again. It's going to be out, either it's already out or we're a few days prior to the EP release, depending on where this episode falls. But talk to me about writing that EP, because it's a little different in the sense of like it's like it shows, especially when I listen through your work. I haven't like done like a full sit down and listen for a while, but like listening through your work, it's been interesting to listen to you kind of switch from like an indie punk rock kind of to this more, it's more not retrospective, because that's kind of how it's been, but it's a much mellower indie pop. You've definitely built in some more elements that are, it's less abrasive and more comforting, you know? So
like a warm blanket.
There you go. So talk to me about writing this EP and kind of coming off, you know, the high school, those releases, and coming into this.
Well, I finished writing and like releasing senior as I was going into college. And so after that came out, it was like right at the beginning of, I think I remember writing like the liner notes for that like Bandcamp, like on the Bandcamp page the day before I moved into my dorm for like the first time. And so it was kind of like I had been doing this thing for 4 years, and then now that thing was over and there was like nothing after that. Because when I was working on all of those projects, it was like there was always a next step, you know. It was like after freshman there's sophomore, and you know, so on and so forth. So it was like, it was really the first time in my artistic like career where I didn't really have like a next step that I could think of. And so I really started to kind of analyze the music that I was making and the way that I was writing and the things that I was doing. And it was like, is this really, you know, the music that I want to make forever? Or is this just kind of like the way that things were coming out, you know, when you're like an angry, sad, melancholic high schooler, you know, from like a small town in Minnesota. And I decided I was like not gonna try and put myself in any boxes or like try and keep doing the same thing that I had been doing, and just kind of like write whatever I felt like and whatever felt good. And so, you know, I kind of just ended up writing like, I wrote pretty much like for all of my freshman year of college, just like whatever songs felt nice and whatever I was feeling. And I didn't really care if it leaned more like alternative, like rock or like folk singer songwriter. And so I came out of the year like with 20 or 25 songs that I felt were like the best songs that I had ever written. And so then they were all like weirdly different and like didn't really feel like they were anything that I had ever like, that I was writing, you know, in the past. And so when it was like, you know, it came time to like actually like do the record, I was thinking a lot about how I had kind of grown up over the course of like writing the whole thing, and how even like externally, like things had made me kind of reconsider who I was as an artist and like what I was doing. And so that was kind of like where the name came from.
Yeah.
Along with some other kind of like more literal stuff like on the record. So,
well, you said the kind of the external things making you reevaluate your artistic. What were some of those things that were making you just kind of take that internal kind of inventory of what you were doing as a songwriter?
I think while I was writing it, just like being away from home for the first time was a very eye-opening experience for me, and just kind of having all of this freedom that I didn't really know what to do with. So that was odd. And then, you know, like halfway, or even not even like halfway, like in March, like getting sent home because of like COVID. And then, you know, just like a lot of like, I'm sure everybody kind of can relate to just like sitting around and just like mulling over like your whole life at that point, being stuck inside and just like, oh gosh, like
yeah,
I'm really stuck here, you know?
Just like, what the fuck do I do now? I said, it's just like, well, what the hell do I do now?
Yeah, exactly. So it was a lot of stuff like that. And then, you know, all of the racial injustice that was happening over the summer, and, you know, just kind of trying to reconsider a lot of things that maybe I wasn't considering before.
Well, then talk to me, like, so I have, it's the Start Again's 5 songs. So let's talk through, let's talk through the songs a little bit, just so like, it's not a long one. We're not going to be sitting down here doing like a song exploder, you know, just really diving in. But so the EP starts out with 1044, which is kind of like this, it's definitely an opener track. So talk to me about writing that and kind of where you were while that song was coming together.
I think that was something that I wrote right at the beginning of like when I had just gotten back from being at school. So I was just kind of hanging out in like my parents' house and just being like, oh boy, this is a thing that's happening for sure. And I was, you know, just kind of being very reflective on my life and where I wanted to go and what I was doing, and, you know, just kind of having like a moment with myself about the things that I felt were important and the things that I wanted to do and not do. And so I wrote that song. I think it was a voice memo. And so it was just titled like 10:44 PM. And it just kind of all came out at once, just like onto the page. And that was kind of, I don't think I even really like went back and did any, or went back and edited it all, really. It was just kind of, it was more of like even like a journal entry than like writing a song. It was just, you know, wrote a bunch of stuff down, and then I was like, oh, that's neat.
Yeah. Well, the way you mentioned that, like listening to the lyrics, especially with that, like, you know, I just want people to like what I'm hearing, or like what I put out. I'm not here to like, you know, it just, that being your main goal, especially just stating it in the thesis of that song and kicking off the EP that way, feels very much like it's just kind of that internal monologue of, in the context of you sitting around trying to figure out what everything is and what you need to do next.
Yeah. Like I don't ever think that I've been particularly interested in like a lot of the aspects of like being like a professional musician, you know. It's always been more of like a retrospective thing for me, and just like a way for me to get my feelings kind of out of my body. It's like a cathartic thing, you know. And so I don't really, at the end of the day, I'm just kind of like making music for me, and like I just want people to enjoy it. I'm not really there for the like the fan service or like the, oh my god, like can I get your autograph or paint, shit like that. Not really my cup of tea.
You're just there to make art and have a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, moving on, we've got the single, which is I've Got All I Need. Tell me about this one.
This was a song that I wrote probably right around this time last year about my partner, who I'm with now, actually currently still. But we were leaving a party in an Uber, and I was bringing her back to her dorm room. And it was just like an experience that I had where I felt like there wasn't like this kind of like big moment where I knew that like I was really into this person. It was just kind of like you sit there and that kind of epiphany just hits you and you're like, oh yeah, this is the person. There's not like some big like life-changing thing. It was more like the little stuff and like the nuance and all of the tiny moments that had led up to that. So it's kind of just like a love letter to all of the tiny things that someone does that you appreciate, rather than like the like the doves flying everywhere and like the whole like the horse-drawn carriage and whatever.
That big cinematic moment that usually you see in the movies when the realization hits. Yeah,
exactly.
With the single, you put out a music video with Tree Dome. Was that shot in Minnesota here, or was that?
Yes, that was shot at Carpet Booth, actually.
Okay.
Carpet Booth Studios, like right outside. They're kind of like a little outside of Rochester, which is the city where I grew up in. So there's a lot of like farmland and like rural energy. So we were just like, I kind of had this vision of it being similar to have you ever seen the music video for Yellow by Coldplay?
Yeah, that's one.
Where it's just Chris Martin like walking down the beach and he's getting like hit by the water. Yeah. I kind of wanted to do that, or like that kind of style of video, but make it more me. And so, I was talking with Nate and Maggie, because they were the ones who were doing video for Rochester while I was there doing audio. They were like, yeah, we want to do this video with you. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And so one day, I think it was, I don't know if it was like during or after, but we just like stuck around after the last band had left for the live stream and filmed that video from like right when the sun was starting to set until it had set. And yeah, super fun. I'm very stoked with how that ended up turning out.
It's sick, especially with like the colors, that purple tint with the green. It's like a really cool, and the vibe of like that single. It just feels it feels like a sunset track, like that calm of sitting out with the corn, in that area.
Yeah, just kicking it.
Yeah,
love corn. Shouts out corn.
Shout out corn.
Great stuff.
Yeah. Well, moving on then to the third song, which to me, listening through the EP, was one of like the densest songs compositionally, which is We Lost Track of Time. So just talk to me about that one.
That was probably the first song that I wrote.
Okay.
For like the whole record. I think it was like right when I had gotten to school, and I was kind of I don't know, it was just about like a relationship that I had with a friend from back home, and we weren't really talking anymore, and I didn't know if it was like because of the things that I was doing, or if it was because of the things that they were doing, or if it was kind of like a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. It was just like another situation where I just like kind of was feeling this like looming sensation of like kind of change, and how I had kind of, you know, run out of time in a sense to like fix all of these things in this relationship that were struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing that I could really do about it, you know, because I was all the way across the country at that point. So yeah, it kind of felt like the subject matter of that song in particular was not the heaviest, but maybe more heavy than a lot of the other songs on the record, and kind of leaned more towards the music that I had been writing in the past. So we kind of tried to, you know, approach it in a more like old me direction, with like a lot of kind of heavier instrumentation and stuff like that.
When writing this, do you like sit there and just kind of work on everything in like your DAW yourself, or was this more of a, you had the idea and brought it to the studio to then work on with like the people who help produce Start Again?
Usually my writing process is I'll either have a melody or like a chord progression on guitar, and then I'll have an idea for lyrics, and I'll bring that in and try and kind of write something for the part that I have that I'm playing on guitar. And so I have usually like, those are like my demos, is just like my like voice memos of me singing over a guitar part that I'm playing. And that was really like all that I had for like demos when I went into the studio. Yeah. So when I was recording with Zach Zern and Dylan Hilliker, who is a good friend of mine who played drums on the record as well, we had already done a bunch of pre-pro, and we had kind of, you know, cut down all of the songs that we didn't want, and we're left with all of the ones that we had time to work on. And so every day we would just sit down with like a new song, and we were like, okay, what does this need? Like, how are we gonna kind of approach this so that like the process of each song kind of fits the musical content.
Gotcha. You said you had, 25 or so songs coming into this. Since you mentioned, you were every day coming to the studio, you were looking through that. Were you just going through, demos in the studio then there and just seeing what you wanted to do, or was it just kind of previously you had whittled, 25 down to 5?
I knew that that I was going to record it at Carpet Booth with Zach, so we did a bunch of pre-pro meetings, like just like over Zoom, where we listened to like all of the songs that I had like demoed out, and we talked about like, oh, well, maybe this would go here, and like this would sound cool with, whatever. And then at the end of like listening to all the songs, we kind of talked about which ones weren't like, not necessarily like the best songs, but which ones would work the best, like for this like project and like the time that we had to record. So like we knew going in that we had like 3 or 4 days to do the 5 songs. So, and we knew which songs we were doing. So
Gotcha.
It was really just like going in the day and deciding what song we were going to work on that day, and then just kind of getting after it.
Gotcha. So it wasn't as much of a sit there and get to play. It was just kind of Gotcha. One of the fourth song on the EP, which is Watermelon, which is very much a song that grabbed me just because it was so sonically different than the rest of the songs, which it felt like it didn't. It was obviously like I shouldn't say obviously, it was definitely like a transition song. But when you're coming out of, we lost this time and going into the final song, but also it definitely felt like it was a demo. Like, it was recorded very, minimally, and it was meant to just kind of sit as is. Was that kind of the intention when?
Yeah. I mean, it was always, kind of supposed to be like an interlude more than like a song. And so, obviously it's not very dense, like structurally.
Yeah.
So we kind of wanted to keep the vibe of just like the demo that I had done on my phone. So I think we ended up like, we had like a microphone like out one of the doors, and I was sitting outside with just like a guitar, like singing and getting guitar through this one mic. And you can, if you listen to it, you can kind of hear like the birds that are like moving around outside. Yeah. But yeah, it was super important to just kind of keep the vibe, because it was more of like a transitional thing from like this super heavy song into like the closer that, just like we wanted to preserve that kind of mood.
Yeah. Well, then let's talk about the closer, Oregon, which is definitely like feels much more like the new beginnings kind of part of which start again, like the title itself, you're starting again. It's that new chapter. So talk to me about that closing track here.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, even like thematically, like start again is the last line of that whole song. So it's kind of like another sort of thesis statement for like this new kind of sound, and I don't know if I'd call it like an era, but like this new music that I'm writing, how, I'm kind of just like had gotten comfortable in, producing and like writing stuff that sounded like that, and was ready to kind of move away from the more indie, like garage rock kind of sound that I had been working in the past. But
since you kind of moving into that new era, reading the liner notes of Senior, it felt like it was very much a send off for like solo Wyatt Moran. Were you intending to return to like the solo aspect, or were you thinking about doing something else, either a different name or
not particularly. I honestly, like, I knew with Senior that it was like the end of me making like that kind of genre of music. And so I was kind of like, oh, well, maybe that's the end of this. Maybe that's the end of like Wyatt Moran, and that I was going to go off and like, have a pseudonym or like start a different band or do something else kind of in like a different vein. But then I was just, I don't know, at some point I think I was just kind of like, fuck it.
Yeah.
And I was just, I don't know, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, it's a podcast. We don't, you can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're not going to lose any sponsors.
No, we don't have to worry about the FCC here.
Yeah. But at a certain point, I was just like, I just kind of said, fuck it. And it's the music that I'm writing, and it's all me. So that's just kind of the way that it is. And I think for a while I was kind of like, well, I don't really know what's going to happen with these songs, like even after I recorded them. But then I don't know, at a certain point I just kind of decided that I wasn't going to get a lot out of like doing like this like new thing that I thought was the answer, when the answer was really kind of, not to be like, a cornball, but like inside me the whole time, so yeah.
Because you were in another band as well as at State House, right?
Yes, I am.
You put out a record middle of last year, April,
Yep.
if I'm remembering correctly. Were you dedicating songs that you were writing throughout college to that, or was that an impact on, this new solo release?
Yes, in a lot of ways, actually. I usually when I would write songs, last year, I would kind of have a general idea of whether they were like kind of this more folk leaning stuff or like more prototypical kind of like rock stuff.
Yeah.
And so we started that band like in September, October of last year. So all the songs that I was writing, I was like, oh, this would be a cool State House song. And I would bring it to Ben and Gia, and we'd kind of like workshop the song and like kind of work on everything together, versus like I'd write something and I'd be like, oh, this would be a cool like Wyatt song. And so I'd kind of just tuck it into the folder and kind of just be thinking about it in the back of my head. Or if something came to me one day, I'd go back and like make edits by myself. But I think the main difference between like State House and like Wyatt Moran music is the fact that we're always writing together. Voice crack there. With State House, and it's more kind of collaborative versus me just kind of writing and creating most of the songs myself for my solo stuff.
Did you find, working on State House affirming to, because you were talking earlier, you kind of not to get corny, but the answer was inside of you for kind of affirming. Did you find State House affirming of that?
Yeah, I think, there's a part of me still that loves like going to basement shows and playing to like a bunch of your good friends and playing loud. That's something that, I've always loved, and I think I will continue to love for the rest of my life. But, there's also a part of me that wants to just sit in a chair and play guitar by myself at a comfortable volume that doesn't hurt my ears for, a couple days afterwards. So I think I'm very lucky to have kind of an outlet for both of those things, and like music kind of on both sides of the spectrum, so that I get kind of the best of both worlds. And I mean, State House has a new record that I'm working on mixing right now, coming out in the near future as well, hopefully. So it's got a lot of cool musical endeavors that are very diverse, and it's nice to have, a lot of different outlets to express myself through.
Okay, well, kind of moving away from this, we're coming into the end of the serious questions, and I got a few kind of easier ones to answer here as we wrap up our conversation. You put out Start Again, or will be putting out Start Again through Three Birds Music, the label run by Dylan Hilliker.
Dylan Hilliker.
Excuse me. Talk to me about, that connection and getting that.
Well, me and Dylan have known each other for a long time. I auditioned for his high school band when I was way younger than him. I couldn't even drive yet, and he was maybe like a senior in high school. And so we met initially through that interaction. Didn't get the gig. Hate to see it. But then we met up again a couple years later, because I was playing a house show or a show somewhere local, and he was there, and he was like, oh shit, that's the kid who was like trying to play in my band all those years ago. And so we met kind of through doing a lot of like local shows and stuff. And he's the guy who started Rochester Fest. So I did that for a while, and he kind of just ended up being my drummer. At a certain point, I was just like, hey, like, I need a drummer. Do you want to do this? And he's like, sure. And so we've known each other forever. And he like, you know, he played drums on this new record, and he helped produce this new record. And we've been playing in bands with each other, like pretty much like my whole musical life. So he kind of was transitioning into, you know, being like a manager and like an A&R booking guy. And he came to me and was like, hey, I'm going to start this label. Do you want to be like, do you want this project to be like the first thing that we release on it? And I was like, sure. Because we had already kind of been working with each other and talking about like what the plans were going to be and like what I wanted Start Again to kind of like do. And so it kind of just felt like the right thing to do, because he has kind of been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And so it felt right to kind of do it with somebody who knows me really well and who kind of understands like my vision for the stuff that I want to put out. So
yeah. With someone who, you know, is so hands-on with, I mean, you've been doing this essentially yourself, other than, you know, over the years you've added musicians here and there, and you've been working with Dylan. Do you find it, you know, hard to sometimes, you know, when in the studio or something, giving up that little bit of control, whether you're not, you know, completely producing your own stuff, or, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in an interesting position, because for this record in particular, I had known Dylan like maybe 5 years.
Yeah. And
I had been working with Zach for like a couple years as well. So it was really like two people that I trusted a lot creatively, of just helping me flesh out like these ideas for these songs. And it never really bothered me, you know, if it's all in pursuit of kind of the same end goal.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to make shitty music, you know, and it's like everybody just wants it to be the best that it can be. And I trust both of their like creative ideas a lot, and they trust me. And so it was just a very comfortable environment to be working in.
Do you have any, you know, future, you know, events or plans kind of coming up with this release that people should be aware of?
Not like not at the moment. There'll definitely be, there should still be CDs and tapes available for pre-order or for actual order over at nicethings.co/Wyatt Moran. And there will be merch that's available currently of some variety that will be purchasable as well. But other than that, probably not. Well, I don't have anything like, no like virtual shows or anything kind of in the pipeline yet.
Gotcha.
But that might change by in a month from now, or whenever this comes out, the 19th. Yeah, like almost a month from now.
Yeah, a month from recording this. Well, for people to be aware, in case, you know, when plans change, where can people connect with you online then?
I think all of my social medias are at Wyatt J. Moran.
And Moran is spelled
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, Moran.
Yep. Perfect. Well, Wyatt, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me here today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
The Ear Coffee Podcast is a companion to the blog of the same name. If you like this episode, please leave us a rate and review so we can stand out among the other music podcasts. You can follow us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Ear Coffee. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.